All right, obviously timing is a huge issue. This is going to be one that most of you are going to really struggle with to begin, because it's such a fickle thing as to how fast or slow something happens. How many frames does it take for my foot to go one step? How much does it take for the guy next to me to go one step? What happens if I'm running? What happens if I'm jumping or skipping or doing something completely random? So that's why we use reference video for lots of stuff that we're going to be doing. All right, so timing is going to be one of those things where you really have to kind of play into how long things are going to take. Also, when things happen is kind of essential. What we're doing in this class, there's not going to be anything too crazy with it, but we would just want to pay attention to that, okay? If you have a scene that's involving more than one character, usually you get into more timing issues because you have not only your character that you're dealing with here, but you have this other character and then how they interact as far as timing goes. And then also exaggeration. This kind of goes to that squashing and stretching, where we not only want our character to squash and stretch a little bit, or the ball to squash and stretch, but we want to exaggerate the movements of it just so that it's read better, okay? And this is just one of those things that just helps the animation be more readable to someone who's viewing it. I could do something that I think in my mind looks more realistic, but then when I put it in the computer and I show it to someone, that may not come across because there's not enough exaggeration, all right? So if I want the pitcher to really go and show that he's pitching the ball and he's throwing it really hard, I have to really over-exaggerate how far back he pulls or how far forward he throws the ball. The same thing with the punching, the same thing with the squashing and stretching. So we have to exaggerate some of these movements just so they're more readable. In the real world, we're dealing with an unlimited frame rate, okay? There's no frame rate here. In the computer, we're dealing with 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second, or in overseas, it's like 25 frames a second, okay? So we have to kind of figure out how to get these things to read better. So we do stuff like exaggeration, and we do stuff like anticipation and all these other ones. And then this is, that speaker's cutting out. Solid drawing. Obviously for us, we're not drawing anything, but we are creating it in 3D. And this means that we have to make sure that it's visible. We can't have something that is kind of mucked into the foreground and background where they're kind of like squashed together and it's hard to see what's going on. If we want someone to see our animation, we want our bouncing ball to look nice, we can't simply just kind of like throw it into a scene and let it be in that scene. We have to kind of give it a little bit more contrast and give it a little more pop so that it stands out more, okay? So in the 3D aspect, that's what we're talking about, is ensuring our object is a little bit more visible than just kind of throwing it in there. For instance, let's say that this 11 was one of these shades here. It'd be very difficult to see that, okay? If we had a bouncing ball and it was, you know, a little bit dark or a little bit kind of desaturated or decontrasted with the background, it wouldn't be very easy to see that ball's motion. Or if we had a string and that string was so thin you could barely see it move, okay? So we have to make sure that we're keeping these things in mind, that we want people not only to look at the animation but be able to see it clearly and not have to kind of hunt around for it, okay? So this is more of like a rendering thing, but you'll see how some of the other stuff is going to work. And then appeal obviously would be number one. You know, is it an appealing animation? You can create 5,000 animations, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be an appealing animation that people are going to like watching it. It's not going to be exciting. It's not going to be interesting. So this is just another one that just kind of stands out as something that we want to look for, okay? So these 12 principles, I want you to keep this list with you, and as you're working on stuff, I want you to jump to that list and say, okay, do I have this in there? Do I have this in here? Most of the time, you should be able to include most of these things in there, okay? In some of these, like let's say we're doing something where it's very linear movements, we would not have the slow in and slow out, okay? Or we wouldn't have arcs. But most of the time you're going to have arcs. Most of the time you're going to have some slowing in and slowing out. You're always going to be working with timing as an animator. Secondary actions, we may or may not have that kind of thing. We may not have a whole lot of follow-through or overlapping actions in some of our early ones, but some of the other ones, okay. So those are the 12 principles of animation that we're going to be discussing throughout the class. There's also this other video you can watch too. This is like a 4-minute long video, so we're not going to watch this, but it's another thing where they did this and there's a bouncing ball. It's not as good as the other one. And if you're a digital tutors person, Digital Tutors actually has like a whole class of the 12 principles of animation that they go through literally each one, and they have a scene for each one that they discuss even further than I'm doing right here. Okay? All right. So any questions on the 12 principles of animation? No. Yes, close Maya. We have to delete the old preferences from Maya so that we can set up our new preferences.
Okay, can we go to preferences?
Nope, not yet. Make sure everyone has Maya closed first. There we go. All right, so we're going to go to the Start menu and go to Documents. And under Maya, there's a 2014 folder, 2014, and it might say x64 on there. I want you to delete that folder. Delete the folder.
Press delete.
Yep, just click on it and hit delete.
Move to recycling.
Yep. Okay, this is deleting or removing your Maya preferences. So when we boot Maya up, we'll get a brand new set of preferences so that they won't be tainted by anyone else's. Okay? So we're going to set them up so that every time we come in, they're good to go. All right, so go back to the D drive by clicking on either the D on the left.
Safety.
Yep, save D. And then I'm actually going to try this. Let me see if this will work. It worked before. There we go. I'm going to send my screen to your desktop, okay? So it didn't crash last time. We got lucky. It's going to crash in 10 minutes now. I'm going to send this over there. So I'm going to say show the screen to these clients. Okay, so now you have a screen on your desktop that is my desktop. That way you don't have to keep looking over here to see what I'm doing. So just move that to your other screen.
That is amazing. Cool, Rudy.
Yes. Okay, so we're on the D drive. We're going to make a new folder. So you see the new folder button that's up there.
Yep.
Just create new folder and name it your last name underscore first name.
Height underscore.
Shift and then next to the 0. Okay. We never want to use any spaces on computers. People like to use spaces because they can. Avoid using that as much as possible.
Wait, shift and what?
Okay. So inside that folder, we're going to make a new folder called W14.
Okay.
What do we give that? What name goes to that folder?
Ooh, this is crazy.
Now if you're in other classes, because I know some of you are in other classes, that's why we're doing the 2540. So you can separate your 2540 stuff from like your 2550 or 2560 or whatever else. Okay? So inside 2540 we have source and we have work. The work folder is anything that you want to save, anything you want to back up. That's where the work folder goes. If you grab a video from the internet of a ball bouncing and you want to make sure that you have that video as just a reference, you can throw it into the source folder, because if you lose the source folder, you can always go to YouTube and get that video back. Okay? Yeah, you can re-download it. So pretending that you only had, let's say, 1 gigabyte left, your source folder is 7 gigabytes, but your work folder is 1 gigabyte, then you can still back up your work folder. Okay? You can still back up the one that's important. All your Maya files should go into that work folder. So that's the folder we want to always back up. Now, realistically, you're not going to run out of space as long as you do proper file management. So we can just go to the root of D and just back up the whole thing. Okay? So we can close that window. And then we're going to open up Maya. Now on your desktop, there's a Maya 2014. Or you can go to the Start menu and type in Maya 2014. And it's going to ask you possibly, do you want to copy preferences or create default? You always want to create the default preferences. Okay? It may come up on your screen. It may not come up on your screen to ask that. If you had a 2013, it would ask. Okay, so we get a couple pop-ups. One of the pop-ups is what's new highlight settings. You can keep this one clicked on if you want, but what all this is doing is showing you the highlighted features of anything that's new in Maya 2014. Okay, so I'll show you how to turn that off later. So on the bottom of that screen, you can hit Show This at Startup because you don't need to see that window every single time.
Should we just click that then?
Yep, click Show This at Startup to turn off, and then hit OK. And then the other screen that pops up is the startup movies. So if you forgot everything from your intro class and you don't know how to even make a cube, you may want to keep this up so you can watch these little videos that they have of how to create objects, move them around, and so on. I don't need that, so I'm going to turn this Show This at Startup off. And then close it. Okay. Now I also recommend, like for some reason Maya comes in with this funky, like it's off screen. So I always double click the blue bar on top just to maximize my Maya. Yep. There you go. So that way it fills your whole screen. You don't have to worry about stuff being cut off. Okay. So on the bottom right, we're going to start at the bottom right next to the key. There is the animation preferences. So right on the far right next to the key, animation preferences, we're going to click that. And we're going to go straight up to the top of the left category area. Okay. Now this is where if you look on the middle of that, it says highlight color green. That's the color of new stuff that's inside Maya. So if you decided, hey, I don't want that stuff anymore, you could turn it off there, or you could even customize the color to say I like, pink instead. And there's pink. There we go. And we can turn it off, turn it on, whatever. The mouse scroll wheel is enabled. I really recommend not using the scroll wheel. You should get in the habit of using the Alt right mouse button to zoom in and out of stuff. The scroll wheel is just a bad thing to use. We're going to click that. Yes, sir.
May I ask why?
Why? Because I'll show you why. Just keep your stuff where it is. I'll get back into that in a second. Okay. So here I am. I'm working on this sphere. Come on. And then I'm trying to zoom into it. So what I do is I do this. And then I get to this point where I want to get closer and see how it kind of like pops. It pops in and pops out. Well, I don't want that. I want Alt right mouse button, and I can get a nice smooth transition to get as close or as far as I can there. Now in this case, it's not that extreme, but sometimes you literally can't get any closer to the object, but you need to. And Alt right mouse button does that. Okay, make sense? Okay. Let's go back there. Okay. So now, go ahead.
Check that.
Yes, you want to. Oh, you don't have to uncheck it. You can keep it checked. I'm just as a, mental note. I don't like it. Now I do use it sometimes, but I just don't like to use it. We're going to go down to View Cube on the left, and we're going to turn the View Cube off. Now this is one I don't use, and I don't want you to use. The View Cube is a horrible thing. You should just ignore it altogether. Never ever use the View Cube. The reason for not using the View Cube is that let's say we're in the left view, and we switch our view cube to the right side. From now on, the right side or the left view is our right side. So if we wanted to see the left view, we have to go and switch that to left view. So just don't use the view cube. Just use the correct ways to navigate that.
Before 2014, you kind of had to if you wanted to go outside.
Right, before 2014. But yeah, now you don't have to. Let's see. The next one I want to go to is settings down here. Okay. Now in the modeling class, in the intro class, in compositing class, well, everyone ends up in compositing, but we're going to use our timestamp of 30 frames per second. Okay. And the reason we're doing 30 frames per second instead of 24 frames per second is simply because it gives us 6 extra frames per second for us to add a little bit more detail to. Okay. In the real world, you have to figure out what your frame rate is going to be, what's your end result, and then you would time it for that. Okay. So 30 for a beginner works out pretty good because then you get those extra 6 frames to do extra stuff in. Okay, so that's the only reason we're using 30 frames per second. Typically, you're going to use 24 for like film, and then NTSC 30 for like videos. Let's go down to animation. And in the default intangents, we're going to set these to spline. And the default out tangents, we're going to set these to spline. Okay? We'll see what these things are when we get to that part of it. We're just not there yet. One thing you may want to note, under files and projects, we talked about saving often and saving incrementally. Under files and projects, you can turn on autosave, which will automatically save your file every however many minutes you specify. Okay? And my rule of thumb is don't save as often as you don't mind going back and redoing that work. So if you don't mind working for 3 hours and losing everything and redoing that 3 hours, then only save once per day. If you don't want to do that and you only want to redo 10 minutes, then save every 10 minutes. Okay? Not that you're going to lose it every 10 minutes, but you want to just kind of have that set. So you can enable autosave. You can limit the number of autosaves just so you don't have 700 files in there. Here's the reason. That's something else. Here's the minutes. So however often you want it to automatically save for you. Okay. I don't turn it on. You can turn it on if you want to. Okay. That's just up to you. That's your own thing. That's fine there. I think the next one I want to go to, let's jump to selection real quick. Okay, under selection, we're not going to change anything here, but I want you to be aware of this thing called priority. Selection priority is going to be big in this class. What that means is that if I have 15 objects and I marquee across these 15 objects, certain objects are going to be selected over other objects. Okay? So keep your windows where they are. I'm just going to show you what I mean by that.
Should we save it then?
No, keep your window where it is. I'm just going to show you something. So you just watch my screen. Okay? So here's a polygon sphere. Here is a NURB sphere. Here is, come on, a point light. Here is a camera. Okay? If I marquee these, you can see how all 4 of these objects got selected. Okay? These are all on the same priority list. They're all on the same level of selection. But now I'm going to create something else. I'm going to create a joint, not that kind. Okay, and I'm also going to create an IK handle. All right, now I'm going to marquee again. Okay, and you'll see that nothing gets selected except for that IK handle. The IK handle has selection priority. Okay, so if I marquee everything in my scene and I have selection handles, those are going to be the top priority. Okay, now there's other stuff that are higher than that, but I just want you to be aware that certain things have priority. If I delete the selection handle and I marquee, my joint gets selected because the joint has priority over objects. And I delete that, and then these guys are still there. Okay, so just so you're aware of it, there is a priority to it, and you can actually see if you click on these priority things, there's actually a number right here. Okay, the lower the number, the less it is selected. Like 10 is the highest, I believe. Okay, so something with a 10 as a priority is going to be selected before something that's like a 2. Okay, so just so you're aware of it, that's where it is. The next one we're going to go to is time slider. Okay, so the time slider on the left, playback speed, play every frame, and then max playback speed we want to set to real time 30 frames per second. Now we want to, I like to, this is my own preference, is to have the playback speed at play every frame. That way we physically get to see every single frame that we are animating. The max playback speed set to real time means that we will never go past real time. Okay? If we created a bouncing ball and Maya can play it back at 700 frames per second, it'll play it back at 700 frames per second. With this option on though, it limits it to only 30 frames per second. Okay? The difference is that if we animate a ball at 700 frames a second and it looks good at 700 frames a second, we look at it and say, yeah, that looks good. Then we export it, bring it into After Effects, it's going to move extremely slow. Okay? Or extremely quick, I guess. I don't know what it would do. Probably slow. So we always set that to real time. What? Yeah, slow.
Like slow-mo.
There's a thing called a grease pencil. There's some stuff up here. Key ticks, active, key tick size. This key tick size right here is actually when we're setting keys in our timeline. If you have, I can see fine with it, but if you have a problem seeing the little red lines in your time slider, you may want to take your key tick size up to like 2 or 3 or 4. Okay? You can leave it at 1 for now and just make a note of it that you can come back and take a look at it. The next one we're going to go to is undo. And the undo is, you can turn the undo cue off. I don't know why they have that option, but they do have an option to turn it off. And then they have this queue. How big is the queue? How many undos do we have? The default is set to 50 undos, meaning that I can undo 50 times. And an undo means I can undo a selection, undo a reselection. The list is endless, okay? So I typically leave mine at 50. I would not want you to go any higher than 200, okay? If you have to undo 200 times, it might be quicker just to do the operation you were trying to do anyway, okay? Never set it to infinite, okay? Unless you're rebooting your computer every couple minutes. So always finite, 50 to 200 is fine, that works. And then that's it. Okay, so once we're done with the undo area, then we can just hit save on the bottom left. Okay, then we're going to go under create, NURBS primitives, and we're going to turn off interactive creation on NURBS primitives. Then under create polygon primitives, we're going to turn off interactive creation. Again, these are preferences that I dislike, and I want you to dislike them too, because I want you to be better than me. So that's why we have them like that. Those two. Okay. So the next. What?
I think Dylan likes interactive creation.
Does he?
Yeah, it does.
Ugh, disgusting.
It's better if you want to create.
All right, so the next thing we're going to do is go to the custom shelf. So you see the shelf on the far right that says custom? We're going to click on that, and we're going to add some things into our shelf that we're going to be using pretty much every single day, every single class period, okay? So to use, to create a shelf item, you hold down Control and Shift. You may want to write that down if you need to make a note of it. To add a shelf item. Okay, so we're holding Control Shift, and we're going to go to Window Outliner. Okay, and you just click on it and it adds the outliner to your shelf. Okay, so we'll use the outliner very much. Because we have the selection priority, sometimes we need to get joint number 4 selected, but we can't see joint number 4, so we'll use the outliner to select joint number 4. Okay, hold Control Shift still, and go to Window Attribute Editor. Yep. We're going to go to Window Rendering Editors. Hypershade. Okay, we're going to go to Window Animation Editor, Graph Editor. And then while we're in there, also go to the Animation Editor Dope Sheet. Not that kind. It's all over the place in here. Okay, so we have so far 5 of these. We have the outliner, attribute editor, hypershade, graph editor, and dope sheet. We're also going to go under edit, delete by type, history. Make sure you go to delete by type and not delete all by type. Delete by type, history. Okay. And then we're going to go to Modify Center Pivot. And then Modify Center Pivot. That was the next one. And then that should be good. Let me make sure I got them all. I don't know if I want to put freeze transforms on there just because sometimes I like to go into the actual option box to do it, to set it up.
Where'd you find history?
Edit, delete by type, history. if I can add the hotbox. I can. Okay.
There's no way to do the option box
It is.
from the shelf.
Yeah. Control Shift, and we're going to go to Modify, Freeze Transforms, but go to the option box for it.
Should we still keep pressing the shift?
Yeah, still grab Control Shift.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the modify.
Freeze Transform option box.
Where'd you find center pivot again?
Under Modify Center Pivot.
Okay, got it. Ow.
Okay. So now what that's going to do is it'll pop open the option box so that we can see the options when we click on it. Okay. Now some of these are going to be a little bit more apparent as we get progressing in the semester as to why we're putting them up there and why we're using them. But a lot of these are just tools that you're going to constantly be using throughout the class. It just makes it easier to grab stuff here than have to go through and do it through the actual menu. That way you don't have to remember that. Okay. Yeah, that should be good. We can also do this one. Hold Control Shift. We'll do one more. Play Blast option box.
Play blast.
Yep, under Window, Play Blast option box.
Does anyone see that? Oh, found it. Option box.
Yep.
The little square next to it.
Got it.
Okay. Play Blast is something. It's a tool inside Maya that basically goes through and it takes a screenshot of every single frame and then puts it into a player so we can see it in real time. So, hello. So my example, I showed my intro class. In G.I. Joe, they had this Eiffel Tower that they built. The Eiffel Tower was too big to open up in any one Maya file. So they actually had to break it up into several Maya files and then render it out or however they did it. So some things in here are just going to go inherently crazy slow. Like it might be hit the play button and it goes frame 1. Hit the play button still, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4. There's no way that we can look at that and see what the animation is going to look like at the end. Okay? We need to kind of see it in real time to get a feel for what it's looking like. So we can do a play blast that does a screenshot of it, and then we can see in real time what it's going to look like. Okay? If you want to boot up and go to Maya, we'll get you caught up when we get there. Okay? So that's our shelf. That's good there. We're also going to look over here under Panels, under Saved Layouts. There's a couple things that we may bounce around into. On my screen up here, it's probably not going to look very good, but if you go to Panels, Saved Layouts, Perspective, Graph Editor, and Outliner is one that we're just going to click on just so you can see what it looks like. Okay?
Click on it.
Yep, so click on it. And what this is going to do is it's going to change your Maya layout so that it looks like here's the outliner here, here's our graph editor, and here is our perspective view. Okay? So sometimes you want to work in this fashion because we would use the graph editor, which you'll get more acclimated with later today, here, while we're selecting objects here and while we're playing with it to see what it looks like there. Some animators are so good, they don't even use this up here except for previewing their stuff. They do all their animation work right inside the graph editor, where they'll literally go through and say, okay, I have a bouncing ball, I need it to bounce. They'll go into there and just set keyframes inside the graph editor and then preview it just to look and see what it's doing. And they'll come back and play with the graph editor and see it again. Okay? So we can always go back to Panels, Saved Layouts, and change this back to the single perspective or change it back to the 4 view or whatever. All right, but I want you to see that sometimes you may want to do this kind of layout just because it's going to be easier for you to kind of work with. If you have 2 monitors, it makes a lot of sense to kind of keep some of the stuff off to the other monitor and play back and forth with that kind of setup. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we're going to create a project. Under File, we're going to go to the Project window. Yes. And one of the things that may or may not have been forced on you in the intro class, as much as it's going to be in this class, but organization is going to be something that you need to get under your hat to understand it so that when you're creating stuff, it becomes very easy to kind of find what you need and get out what you need, okay? So under File Project window, we go to this, and we're going to make a new project. So click the New button. and we give it a name. So we're going to call this Day1 underscore playing underscore whatever your last name is. Mm-hmm.
Oh, playing like we're playing around.
Correct. All right, so under the location, we need to point our location to that work folder. So we're going to click on the folder and just go to the D drive and find your work folder. So just so you're aware of it, it does create stuff like render data and clips and sound and scripts. I like to use these as we progress and start to use stuff like sound or movies or anything else that I want to use. Especially if we find a movie where, let's say we're doing a clip from a movie and we have a specific video that goes along with this that we're trying to sync up. That's where I'll use like the movie folder just to keep it in there. I'm not bringing that movie into Maya, I'm just using it as reference. Or if I render a movie out of my ball bounce and I want to save it somewhere, I'll put that in the movie folder too. That way when I back up my actual Maya folder, I have all the stuff that I need, okay? If I bring a piece of sound in, I can put the sound inside the sound folder.
Do you ever use the assets folder?
I do not use the assets folder. Does Dylan use it? No one uses it. There's also a bunch of folders that get created within these that we don't need to worry about, okay? So just hit accept. Now one thing that may have happened as we were doing our stuff is that our timeline may have gotten kind of messed up a little bit. If yours says 1.25 or says some crazy decimal number on the far left, just change those both numbers on the left to 1, okay? So it says 1, 1, and then you can just move the time slider back to 1. Okay. Now, just so we get a refresher on this also, let me turn the, I can be pretty lazy. So as I'm changing these numbers, I want them to not have to type it in twice, okay? For instance, I want a longer time slider, okay? So if I want a longer time slider, like let's say 200 frames, if I type it in this box on the right, okay, where it says 60, I have to also then retype it back in this one. All right, so just as an example, if I go to the 60 and type in 200, it doesn't give me a longer time slider, okay? It gives me a longer animation area, but my work area is still set to 30, all right? So then I have to go back here and type this to 200. All right, that's annoying. Let me just set this back to 60 or 30, and set this back to 60 here. Okay. So if I want to do this the correct way, if I'm going bigger, I change this number, 200, and it changes both. Okay. If I want to go smaller, I change this number, 60, and it changes both. Just a lazy thing that just helps you out, okay? So just as a tip, you can use that. Over here on the right, it says no anim layers. We're going to get into what animation layers are, and maybe today I'll show what they are. We also have character sets. We also have a key. This key is auto key. That's what that means. We don't want to use auto key in here, especially as a newbie to animation. It can be very dangerous to use auto key, and I'll show you exactly why we don't want to use auto key. If I create an object like the ball, come on, whoops, like this ball, and I say, okay, I want the ball to be here, and I go through and I set a key, and I go through here and I move this up, and I set another key, and then I'm kind of playing around. I say, okay, I like the animation so far, but I just need to maybe move this down here. There we go. That's probably better if it's there. Okay. Now auto key's off, so it just automatically went and just didn't even set a key for it. Okay. So I'm going to turn auto key on. I'm going to move the ball down here again, and you'll see that it set another key. You can see there's a little red tick on the left of my marker here. So what's going to happen is the ball's going to animate from one spot to the other, but because I didn't set my key on the exact spot, it's going to jump. Okay? You're better off using something that has the exact keyframe of where you're setting your stuff, and then doing all your keyframes on purpose, okay? Because it's very easy to also come in here and go, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I'll just move it back where it was. And then I've accidentally set a key, you know, or I accidentally move it here, don't pay attention to it, and now I have extra keys in here that are just doing some funky stuff. All right, so it's definitely better as a new person to more of a refined animation to not use auto key in there, okay? Right above this are your playback controls. On your note paper, I'm going to read off some of the animation hotkeys from the cube, which is right here, okay? And it really helps you, but I always forget them. So moving forward one frame is Alt plus period. These are hotkeys, okay? So Alt plus period is moving forward one frame. Alt plus comma is moving back one frame.
Oh, wait, what's the first one?
Alt period is moving forward one frame. And Alt comma is moving back one frame.
Less than, greater than, or arrow.
Right, the arrows make more sense. I don't know why they have the period and comma in here.
Because you have the whole shit to do that.
Right. Okay, and then without Alt, you are moving to the next keyframe or the previous keyframe.
Then what?
Without Alt, so just the period and the comma. So period will move to the next keyframe. Comma will move to the previous keyframe. Okay, this can be a tricky thing because as we're doing this, we might have like 17 keyframes within a small range that we need to kind of jump around and get to the exact keyframe. Or there might be like a couple keyframes, a jump, a couple keyframes. And so we want to use these hotkeys to get to it. Alt-V is your playback. So you can hit Alt-V and it'll just play back your stuff. And I don't even know why this is a keyframe, but if you hold down K and your middle mouse button, left mouse button, that's a virtual time slider. It's a silly hotkey. I never use it, but just for trivia in case it's on Jeopardy, I guess.
How do you use it?
Alt and then left mouse button.
Scrubbing?
Yeah, it's just scrubbing. What?
Okay.
You say you push K.
K, right. It's on the other side of the keyboard. It makes no sense to even have it, but it's on this thing. And Alt-V I use a lot. You can also use Alt-Shift-V,
Sorry, what was the scrubbing hotkey?
K, and then the left mouse button.
What was Alt-V again?
Alt-V is playback. So if I hit Alt-V, it's just going to play. That's all it's doing. And then it stops. Alt-V is play. Alt-Shift-V takes us back to our frame 1. It takes us all the way back to the beginning. You can't see it happening, but it's doing that. That's a handy one to have because there's a lot of times where we want to see our animation from the beginning. If we have 700 frames, we don't want to hit play, wait till it gets to the end, and then loop around. We want to just jump back to the beginning and play it again. Okay?
So what does Alt-Shift-V do again?
No, V. Alt-Shift-V just jumps us back to frame 1. Okay? And then to set a key, we're going to use the S key. Now we're going to do it a little bit differently. Right now, the S key is set up so that it sets keys for everything. As a new person to animation, you never, ever, ever want to set keys on everything. Okay? As an example, here's this ball here. There's the ball there. I've set keys for the ball's movement to go like this. So it just moves up. That's all it's doing. But now when I come into the graph editor and I'm looking at this, you can see that I have all these other keyframes in here. Okay, now they're not doing anything, but imagine that this was a much larger animation. Let's say I had just keyframes here and just kind of move this.
Did you automatically do that or just press S key?
I'm just hitting S key, okay? Then I go back to the graph editor. You can see that this thing is very messy. Some of these things aren't doing anything, like the rotates aren't doing anything. And it's adding keyframes for every single thing that I do. So if I want to go through and tweak stuff, I have to weed through all the crap and then get to the stuff that I actually want to work with, okay? So we're going to go under Animate Set Key option box, okay? And if you need to, you can change your animation, your menu up here to Animation. And then go to Animate set key option box. And we're going to say, there you go. All keyable attributes from channel box. Okay? So where it says all keyable attributes from channel box. And what this is going to do is it'll allow us to set keys on whatever we have highlighted in the channel box. Okay? So just hit set key. It'll give you an error because you don't have anything selected.
How did you do that?
Animate, set key option box. And then go to all keyable attributes from channel box.
I don't have animated.
Yeah, change this menu over here. Yep, to animation. Okay, so all keyable from channel box, we hit set key. And so now what's going to happen is if I have this object selected, let me delete these keyframes. And I hit S, oops. What? It should not be doing that.
I think it did have it selected first.
Yeah. Well, it shouldn't be highlighting that. That might be a new 2014 thing where it's setting it on all those. Well, it's still better than it was before. All right. Selected.
Well, you have to have your translate selected in the.
Right, I still have to have something selected here. Before, I could click here, not have anything selected, hit S, and it wouldn't do anything.
Oh.
Where now it's like overriding it, whatever. It still works better than the old one. All right. Or it doesn't work better than the old one, but it still works. Okay. So what this is going to allow us to do is that if I have to purposely click on what I want to set a key for. So if I go to my translate Y and hit S, it sets a key just on the translate Y. If I want to go to rotate Z, hit S, it sets a key just on that rotate Z. Okay? So that's just a helpful thing for us as we're working. The other keyframes that you want to keep in mind are setting stuff for just rotates, translates, or scales. Okay? So if you remember from the intro class, what is the move tool hotkey? W. Okay. What is the rotate key? And what is scale? R. Okay. So shift plus whatever their hotkey is will set a key just for those. Okay. So if I have this sphere selected and I hit shift W, it sets keys just for the translates. If I hit shift E, just for rotates. Shift R, just for scales. Okay. When we're doing stuff like doing the squash of that ball, I'm setting all three scales at the same time, okay? Or if I, for some reason, I haven't gotten to the case where I need to do it, but if I needed to rotate this in all three directions at the same time, I could do that in the rotate, but I've never really had that where I needed to do that, okay? So Shift E, Shift W, and Shift R. And then I think that's all the hotkeys that we're going to need at this time. Yes, that's fine. Okay. All right. So now we have this. So let's go and create a sphere. I don't care if you pick NURBS or polygons at this stage, but just create a sphere. Okay. Now it doesn't matter that the sphere is cut off in the middle of the plane. It has no relevance to our animation at all. However, as someone who is kind of like a detail freak, that really bothers me that it's cut off by the plane. So any animations that I do, I use that plane as my ground, okay? And most animators will use that plane also as their ground. So you want to make sure that when you animate stuff, the plane is your ground. 0 is your ground. So what I want to do is I want to take my sphere and I want to sit it perfectly on the ground. Okay, so I'm going to go to my translate Y and just punch in 1. Okay, punching in 1 in the translate Y brings that sphere right to the ground. Now the reason it wouldn't do that is what would happen if I took this and scaled it up? Well, now 1's not going to work, okay, because I scaled it. But as long as my sphere is at the default settings, I type 1 in the translate Y, there it is. All right, now I don't want 1 to be on the, I don't want this to have to be 1 in the translate Y in order for me to have that be on the ground, okay? Because what I want to have is that when I type 0 here, come on. When I type 0 there, then it goes to the ground. I don't want to go back under the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to use freeze transform. So in our shelf, we have the freeze transform option box. Click on that one. It says FTO. Okay? And what freeze transform does is it takes our translates, rotates, and scales, and it resets them to the default values of 0s and 1s. Okay? So our scales default value are 1. Our translate and rotate default values are 0. So I'm just going to hit freeze. And what we're going to see is that my sphere now has its 0 position right where I need it. Okay?
You hit freeze transform?
Yep. And as an animator, it's not only just important to kind of animate things so that they make sense, but it also we want to make it easier for us to manipulate stuff. So that if I know that 0 is the ground, then it's going to make it a lot easier for me as I go animating things that I know where things should be. Okay. Now also let's pretend that someone comes in and they, did this. They kind of like ruined my sphere. They scaled it, they moved it, they rotated it, and I need to get it back to its 0 spots. Okay. Again, because of laziness, I could come over here and type these in, but I don't want to do that because that's still too much work for me. So I'm going to go under Modify and say Reset Transformations. And Reset Transformations automatically does it. Okay? I don't find that I have a typically large use for Reset Transformations, but if you need to use it, there it is. Okay? All right, so what I want you to do is we're going to take our sphere and we're going to pull it back negative 12 degrees in the Z direction. So you can type it in if you want, or you can just move it.
Negative 12?
Yes. Now again, this doesn't matter that it's on the left, but it makes more sense in my mind to think that the positive direction would be towards the right. Okay? So as we move this thing in the positive 12, it makes more sense to me that that would work correctly. Okay? The other way would just drive me crazy. So, and realistically, it doesn't matter, but it just does. Okay, so we're here. So we're going to set a key just on that translate Z. Okay? So we want to click right on the word translate Z in the channel box, and then hit S. S for set key.
Got it.
Okay? So now just your translate Z should have a key set for it.
Yep.
Okay?
Just like our Pac-Man project.
Exactly like the Pac-Man project, except we're going to do the other stuff. Now the other way we could set a key, let's pretend that we didn't do that little set key, hotkey thing. If we were to right click on there, we get several options inside that right click menu for setting keys, deleting keys, copying keys, whatever. Okay? So this is a menu that I may jump to randomly to do stuff. So key selected is going to do exactly that. Key the one object that we have. Key all is going to key everything. For some things, you want to key all. Okay? For what we're doing right now, we don't. Right now, we're just playing with it. We want to focus our attention on one attribute. All right? Yes, sir.
You right-clicked on what to get that selection?
Right on the translate Y. Right on the word
Okay.
translate Y. I'm sorry, translate Z, whatever it was. Anyone will bring up that menu. Breakdown selected is something different. A breakdown is different than a keyframe. It allows us to make a connection between keyframes. Okay? So let's say I had our guy moving from here to here, and I did that over 100 frames. What if I want to take a bunch of keys in the middle, let's say it's bouncing, and I want to take those and I want to shrink all that stuff in together. I could put breakdowns in the middle, keyframes on the end, and then squeeze everything. That's getting beyond what we're going to be doing in this, so we're going to keep everything as a keyframe, but if you hear the term breakdown, it's just another kind of keyframe that keeps that connection between them. Okay? Muting right here allows us to isolate an attribute. Sometimes when you're doing an animation, you're like, something funky is happening. I'm trying to do this ball bounce, and it's just doing something quirky, and I have 7 different things that are moving around. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we are. So something quirky is happening with this, and I want to kind of isolate each one of my attributes so that I can figure out where it's coming from. So what I can do is mute them. Basically, it turns off all the attributes or turns off that attribute so I can see what the other ones are doing. All right. So if I have an object and it's rolling along, but then it does this weird funky thing, I can say, okay, well, let me isolate the rotation. So I isolate everything inside there by using these mutes. So I can mute stuff and unmute stuff. There's cutting. Deleting is the one you're probably going to use most often here. Okay, deleting an animation or deleting something off there is kind of key if you mess up. Now, if I delete it, you see that it just goes away. Now, I believe if I have extra keyframes and I delete, yes, it does do both. Okay, so it's going to do both if we use the delete in here. It'll actually delete all those keyframes where we can cut them and paste them and whatever else. It works the same way as copy paste. Cut, paste, whatever. Here is freeze also, where we could just freeze right from the right click. There's duplicate values, whatever, this stuff. Where's the other one I wanted to go to? Oh, they moved it out of this menu. That's why I don't see it. It's actually under Animate, the Animate menu, which is ghosting. Ghosting is a tool that allows us to kind of see what's happening to our object along the way. Basically, if we look at frame 1, we can see where it is. If we look at frame 30, we can see where it is. If we look at frame 60, we can see where it is. Ghosting allows us to see the in-betweens also at the same exact time. And it gives us kind of like a ghost, which is why they call it a ghost, view of it, okay? That way, if your object is doing something quirky, you can look at it at every frame and say, okay, I see where the issue is here, all right? So we'll also be using ghosting, okay? All right, so then we have our ball. We're at frame 1. We set a key at frame 1 at -12. So now let's go up to 60. So you may have to change your time slider at the bottom to 60 and 60. And we're going to go up to 60 and change it to a +12. We can hit Alt-V, if you remember, Alt-V we can hit, and it plays our animation. We can use the left and right bracket to jump between our keyframes once we've stopped the animation. We can use Alt and the period and comma to go frame by frame. Okay. So we're going to stop the animation. So hit stop if you need to. Rewind it to frame 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this animation, and we're going to create several balls that are kind of erasing each other. Okay? So we're going to go under, we stop the animation, we rewound it to frame 1. We're going to go to Edit, Duplicate Special Option Box. Okay? Now what we want to do is if I simply duplicated this, now you don't do anything yet, just watch mine. If I duplicate this and I hit play, you'll see that the other ball just kind of sticks behind, okay? Because it's duplicated, it doesn't take the animation with it. So what we have to do is say, I want to duplicate this, but I want to take all that animation and everything that's connected to it with it also, all right? So that's why we use the duplicate special option box, because we can tell it that we want to duplicate the input graph. Okay, so we're going to click on duplicate input graph and then hit duplicate special. Okay, now switch to the move tool and move it in the red direction over, the X direction over, so it's next to it. Doesn't matter where next to it, just next to it. Okay, everyone's good? Yeah. All right, so now if we were to hit play again, we would see that there are two spheres kind of racing each other and they're running the exact same speed. Okay, now it's not a very exciting race, so we're going to make it a little bit more exciting. So we're going to grab either ball, I don't care which one, and anywhere. You can grab it wherever it's at. Just grab one of the balls. And then on your shelf, I want you to go to the graph editor, the one that says GE. Okay, that's the graph editor. You're going to get this little pop-up, and you may see something in there, you may not see something. We're going to hit F for frame. So if you need to write down F for frame, write that down so that you remember that's a hotkey that we will be using often.
You just went into the graph editor?
Yep, just went in the graph editor and hit F for frame. Okay? Now inside here, we're looking at the graph for that animation. Okay? So we have, if you look at the bottom left of the graph, you see a black dot. That's keyframe number 1. If you marquee keyframe number 1, we'll get the values of it up here where it says stats.
Wait, marquee?
Yep, just marquee. Just click and drag so we drag a box around it. Okay? One of the things that we have to be careful of is inside the graph editor, it'll do this where if I marquee and I have it selected, it'll actually like move it. I don't want to do that. So you have to be a little bit bigger sometimes to grab that. All right. So we have our values up here on the top of this. If you look, it says stats. The first box is a 1. That's what frame it's at. So our first keyframe is at frame 1. Our next box is -12. That's its value. Okay? So if you remember back to your calc class in elementary school, if you remember back to just a basic math class where they talked about graphs, this is what we're looking at here. Okay? At frame 1, which is going in this direction, left to right, that's where our ball is at -12. Okay? So if we marquee the other one, we'll see that at frame 60, straight up, there's our +12. Okay? It doesn't take a lot to understand this except just patience, okay? Just going through it and trying to work through understanding what these things are doing. So if we look at this graph and you look at the shape that that line is, it's perfectly straight, okay? So there's no transition here. This is what we were talking about before, a linear transition. This is perfectly going from one spot to the next spot without any easing in or easing out, okay? So we're going to add some ease in and ease out. Now I can do this per keyframe, or I can do it on a global scale and just do it to all the keyframes, okay? So if I just marquee the middle of this, it'll select both keyframes. So just do a little marquee right in the middle. And then up top, in this graph editor window, you may have to expand it, there are different tangents, okay? These are just presets for what we want these handles to look like, what we want the curves to look like. So if I go to the one that says flat, which is just a straight line that goes across, you'll see that it changes my graph. Okay? So flat is easing in and easing out. Okay? Now it's still taking the ball the same amount of time to get there. So what's happening is, think of it like this. The ball is moving 10 miles an hour. Okay? If the ball is starting here and ending there, and I'm slowing down the start of it, slowing down the end of it, what's going to happen in the middle? It's going to speed up, right? So it's not going to go 10 miles an hour. In the first one, he's going 10 miles an hour the entire time. In the second one, he's going very slow. Maybe he gets to 20 miles an hour, but then he starts slowing down again. Okay? So let's close the graph editor. Let's rewind our animation and play it again. Okay, so we've just changed the entire look of our animation just by clicking a couple buttons. Okay, so now it looks a little bit more exciting. We actually have like the balls are racing now. Okay, but they're still doing the same exact thing. They're still moving from point A to point B. It's just how they're getting there has changed. All right, now you can tell from this animation that it actually kind of looks funny because of how condensed this is. We're only moving 12 or 24 units within 60 frames. It actually looks kind of funny, especially being next to this guy of how it's moving. So we're going to hit stop. We're going to rewind it. And we're going to duplicate that ball again. Okay. Before we duplicate him, this is the one that's flat, the flat tangent. Let's go over here and rename this to be flat. So just click in the channel box and name him flat. Okay, so we're going to go back to edit, back to duplicate special, option box. And we're going to duplicate special again, ensuring that we have the input graph selected as well, still. Okay, and then move him again, just in the red direction. You can move him to the other side, doesn't matter where. Okay, we're going to name this guy stepped. Stepped. Yep, like I stepped on my foot. Okay? So we're going to go back in the graph editor. And then this time we're going to go to stepped, which is the one directly next to the flat one. Okay? Now, based on this, what do you think is going to happen?
It's gonna
It's
bounce.
gonna be at its first location for the entire animation until it gets to the last frame and then it'll just pop there.
Exactly. So it's going to teleport, basically. It's going to stay at that value of -12 the entire time, and then in one frame, it's just going to hop there. Okay? So let's close the graph editor. And then we rewind it, and we play it, and we see if we were correct.
Yeah.
And it does it. It's hard to see because it jumps.
Yep.
But that's what it's doing. Okay? So there's multiple reasons we would even want to do something like this. Sometimes you just want something to kind of get into position, or to turn on or turn off or do whatever. Okay? When we get into like the dynamics class, we would have an explosion. And we don't want an explosion just to gradate and go away. We want it to either be on or we want it to be off. So that's where we could turn something like that on using something like stepped. Now I could get around without using the flat or the stepped or the spline tangents by setting keyframes at every single one of our frames to say exactly what I want it to do. So I'm going to do just this. Don't do this. I'm just doing it.
For fun?
What? No, I'm just doing this just so you can see. And what I'm going to do is this is stepped. Graph it. Okay, so I'm just going to change this back to being flat. There we go. Okay, so now it's back to this smooth motion one. But what I'm going to do is go to frame 59, reset this to -12, reset a key, and so do one more thing. Yes, it is, because I have to make all of this flat. There we go. All right, so now it's going to stay exactly there, and then it's just going to jump over that one frame. So you can accomplish things without using tangents at all. And some of the people who are really, really good animators will do stuff like this, okay, where they just go through and they just physically go through every single frame and set keyframes to get the exact movement that they want. If you think about the people who do like claymation, there is no in-between, where Maya is doing what's called an in-between here, where it's trying to figure out what transition it should have. For claymation, there is no in-between. You have to take a picture every single frame, otherwise it doesn't work. Okay? So in this case, Maya can do the work for us. All right, so that's enough for today. So let's save as, save scene as. And we'll just call this balls racing underscore whatever your last name is.
Balls underscore racing.
No.
Last
Balls
name?
racing underscore.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want. But make sure you do your last name in there, and make sure you also get in the habit of putting an underscore 01 at the end of it. Okay, next version 02, next version 03. It gets you in the habit of incrementing our stuff.
Oh, okay, save as.
Okay, and then we do save as. All right, now we're going to close Maya down after we're done saving, because we need to back up our preferences. If we don't back these up, then they're gone forever, and we can never get them back without rebuilding them ourselves. Okay? So we've saved our stuff. We closed Maya down. So we're going to go to the D drive. So go to your Start menu, go to Documents. That gets you to the D drive. And then inside the Maya folder, you remember about an hour ago we deleted the Maya 2014 folder, this 2014 folder right here. So now that we have that, that's where our preferences are at. So what we want to do is we want to copy that folder. So I'm going to hit Control-C to copy this folder, or I can right-click on it and say copy, whichever way makes me happier. Okay, so that just saves it into the clipboard.
Copy to what?
Right now, we're going to paste it in a second. So now we're going to go back to the D drive, so you can hit the back button, or you can go to Documents, or you can go to the D drive, whatever. Then you're going to go into your folder. So I'm going to go into Sarcona. I'm going to go into W14. I'm going to go into 2540. And I'm going to paste my preferences right there.
Where? To the work or resource?
Nope, you just right click and paste it right into the middle of nowhere. Okay? Now these preferences are your preferences that you're going to be building on every single class. When we come in on Wednesday, okay, so we're going to right click on our entire folder. So my entire folder that's called Sarcona Sean, I'm right clicking and copying. And I'm going to go onto the student drive. On your desktop, there's a student drive. On the folders here, there's a student drive. So click on student. And in the 2540 folder, there's a student backup folder. Paste your stuff inside the student backup folder. Okay? So right now we have our stuff on the individual computer and we have stuff on the server. Okay, so we have it backed up in 2 spots. Now something could happen to any one of these computers. Someone could come in tomorrow and wipe the D drive and all your stuff is gone. Someone could go onto the server and delete this folder and it's gone. I say that because it has happened before. I want you to make sure you have it backed up in several spots. So if you have your thumb drive or you have Dropbox or you have whatever, you should also take that folder and copy it to that location. And when you get home, you should copy it off of that and put it onto your home computer. Okay? Think of this as an actual job. If you're getting paid $150,000 to do this job, you don't want to screw it up. So you want to make sure you have backups in at least 3 spots. Okay? And then make sure you're managing those. Make sure you know which one is the latest version so you don't overwrite it. How many people have Macs in here? Okay, if you have a Mac backing up stuff and a Mac copying files, it's completely different than a PC copying files. If I take this folder that's called Sarcona Sean and I'm on a PC, and let's pretend that I just do this. I copy it and I go to my D drive and I paste it. Okay, what it says right here, this is the key word right there. Do you still want to merge this folder? Okay, and what that means is that it's going to take the files I have here, the files I have here, and it's going to put them together into one folder structure. Now, on a per file basis, if there's files with the same name, it'll say, do you want to overwrite it? Do you want to not copy it? Or do you want to copy both and just change the name of one? Okay, so there's where the difference is. On a Mac, what it's going to tell me is, do you want to overwrite? Okay? So what that means is that if I accidentally copy the wrong way, I copy the old stuff over the new, and I say yes, overwrite, it's gone forever. Okay? So you have to be very careful when you're backing up on a Mac that you back up you copy the most recent file over the oldest file. And it'll typically tell you, if I go back and paste this, it'll typically tell me a date. Okay? Do I want to merge this folder, 115 at 253, with this one, 654, okay? And I would want to not do that in this case, okay? They're the same folder, it doesn't matter, but you have to be aware of which one that is, okay? And I would even be, if you're really concerned about it and you really don't want to make a mistake, go into the folder and just grab the file you need, okay? Or look at the file and see. So if I say this is the file that I want, I can just copy that file and put that onto the other computer. All right? Or make sure that I rename my folders or whatever. All right? I don't like Macs for that reason. I don't know why they'd have that as an option, or why not an option, but why they force you to do an overwrite instead of a merge.
Only just now in the new OS.
They fixed it.
Yeah.
With the right mouse button click, right? In the middle of the mouse button. Okay, so in the new OS, apparently they fixed it or whatever. They probably give you an option.
Now they fix their prices.
Yeah.
And their chipsets.
Okay, so that's it. So now we have it backed up on the server. We have it backed up here. That's all we're going to do for today. I'm going to save this lecture to the resources, and I'll also put it through Angel. If you haven't been through Angel yet,